Fear has a scent all its own, sharp and metallic, cutting through even the strongest defenses to lodge itself in the primitive parts of the brain where survival instincts reign supreme. It filled the corridors of Shadowpine's stronghold in the hours before dawn, carried on frantic footsteps and whispered conversations that grew more desperate with each passing moment. The Alpha King's pups were missing, not just misplaced during play or hidden away in some forgotten corner of the vast fortress. Truly, inexplicably gone. 4-year-old Prince Kieran and 3-year-old Princess Liana had vanished from their heavily guarded nursery without leaving any trace that made sense to the experienced trackers who had been called to investigate. Their beds were empty, their clothes undisturbed, their favorite toys abandoned exactly where they had been placed before sleep. The windows remained securely locked from the inside. The door showed no signs of forced entry, and the guards who maintained constant vigilance had seen and heard nothing unusual during their watch. For Alpha King Raiden Blackfell, the disappearance represented more than parental nightmare. It was potential catastrophe that threatened the stability of his entire realm. The children were his only heirs, born to a queen who had died, bringing them into the world and leaving behind vulnerability that enemies might exploit. Their safety was paramount, not just for personal reasons, but for political ones that extended far beyond the stronghold's walls. Yet in all the chaos of searches and investigations, of theories proposed and strategies debated, no one thought to look in the quarters where those who mattered least made their humble homes. No one considered that sometimes the lost seek not the powerful or the prominent, but the gentle and the overlooked. No one imagined that 2 frightened children might follow instincts older than civilization itself, seeking comfort not from strength but from kindness, not from authority, but from someone whose very existence had been dedicated to nurturing others without expectation of reward. And so the panic continued through the longest night anyone could remember, while 50 yards away from the chaos, in a small room tucked beneath the stronghold's foundations, the missing heirs slept peacefully in the arms of an Omega, whose presence was so unremarkable that even in crisis, no one thought to include her in their search. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen not through investigation or analysis, but through the simple act of opening doors that no one considered worth looking behind. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The emergency bells began tolling at 3 a.m, their bronze voices echoing through stone corridors with urgency that sent pack members stumbling from their beds to discover what catastrophe had befallen the stronghold in the dead of night. Lune Arlo woke to the sound with heart already racing, her Omega instincts immediately interpreting the alarm pattern as signal for maximum alert, the kind reserved for threats to royal family or territorial invasion. She dressed quickly in the practical gray clothing that marked her position in the pack hierarchy, her movements efficient despite the disorientation of sudden awakening. As the stronghold's primary caretaker for abandoned or orphaned pups, Lune had learned to respond rapidly to crises that might require her specialized skills, though she couldn't imagine what emergency would demand nursery expertise at such an hour. The corridors buzzed with activity as she made her way toward the main gathering areas, pack members flowing together in streams of concerned conversation and urgent speculation. But as Lune approached the crowds, the familiar weight of her social invisibility settled over her like a protective cloak. People moved around her without acknowledgement. Conversations continued without including her. And information flowed past her without anyone thinking to provide explanation for someone of her insignificant status. Search the entire West Wing twice. No scent trail beyond the nursery threshold. Guards saw absolutely nothing suspicious. Fragments of overheard conversations painted picture of crisis that involved searching and missing persons. But Lune's position at the edges of gathering crowds prevented her from understanding the full scope of whatever had prompted such massive mobilization of Paku K resources. She finally spotted Healer Morrigan near one of the side passages, the older woman's expression grim as she conferred with several other medical staff members about preparations that seemed to anticipate the worst possible outcomes. Healer Morrigan, Lune said quietly, approaching with appropriate deference to someone whose position commanded respect throughout the pack. I heard the emergency bells and wondered if nursery assistance might be needed for whatever's happening. Morrigan looked at her with distracted attention, her mind clearly focused on more pressing concerns than explaining situations to minor pack members. The royal pups are missing from their quarters, child. Every tracker, every guard, Every person with useful skills is searching for signs of how they disappeared or where they might have been taken. The news hit Loon like physical blow, sending ice through her veins as she processed implications that made the emergency bells seem inadequate for expressing the magnitude of crisis facing their pack. Prince Kieran and Princess Lyanna missing meant not just personal tragedy for their father, but potential political chaos that could destabilize the entire kingdom. "How long have they been gone?" Loon asked, professional concern overriding social hesitation as she considered what expertise she might offer to aid in their recovery. "Discovered approximately an hour ago when the night guard noticed their nursery door was standing open, despite protocols requiring it remain secured. No one knows when they actually disappeared or how they managed to leave without being detected by sentries posted throughout that wing." The clinical description couldn't mask the fear underlying Morrigan's words. Fear that children too young to understand danger might have wandered into situations they couldn't survive, or worse, might have been taken by enemies who would use them to leverage political advantage against their father. "Is there anything I can do to assist the search?" Loon offered, knowing her skills with frightened or traumatized pups might prove valuable if the children were found in distressed condition. "I could prepare medical supplies for treating shock or exposure, or help coordinate care for other young pack members if their families are involved in search efforts." "Thoughtful of you, but Lord Commander Garrett has search efforts well organized," Morrigan replied dismissively. "Best thing you can do is return to your quarters and remain available if specialized care becomes necessary once they're found." The polite rejection was typical of how offers from pack members of her status were received, acknowledged but not seriously considered, dismissed not from malice, but from genuine inability to imagine that someone so unremarkable might possess capabilities worth utilizing in crisis situations. Loon nodded acceptance of the dismissal and began making her way back through corridors that remained busy with search parties, organizing and reporting back with negative findings. But as she walked, something nagged at her consciousness, a sense that she was forgetting something important, some detail that might be relevant to understanding what had happened to the missing children. The feeling persisted as she reached her quarters in the basement level, where service staff lived in functional but comfortable accommodations that reflected their necessary but unremarkable contributions to stronghold operations. Her room was small but clean, furnished with basic necessities that allowed dignity without suggesting importance beyond her designated role. But as Loon opened her door, the nagging sense of incomplete recollection crystallized into shock that nearly sent her to her knees. There, in her narrow bed beneath the worn quilt her grandmother had made years ago, were two small forms curled together in sleep that seemed utterly peaceful despite the chaos erupting throughout the stronghold above them. Prince Kieran lay on his back with arms outflung in the complete relaxation of secure childhood, his dark hair tousled against her pillow, and his breathing deep with contentment that suggested wherever he was, he felt completely safe. Beside him, Princess Lyanna was curled on her side facing her brother, one small hand resting on his shoulder as if maintaining connection even in sleep. Loon stood frozen in her doorway, mind reeling as she tried to process the impossible scene before her. The royal pups were here, in her bed, sleeping as if they had always belonged there, while hundreds of pack members searched frantically for them throughout the stronghold and surrounding territories. How had they gotten here? She had no memory of them arriving, no recollection of any interaction that might have brought them to her quarters. The last thing she remembered clearly was falling asleep alone in her bed sometime after midnight, exhausted from a day spent caring for the pack's younger children during their parents' attendance at various pack meetings. Yet here they were, unmistakably present, unmistakably safe, unmistakably content in ways that suggested this wasn't accident, but deliberate choice on their part. Loon's first instinct was to immediately alert the search parties to end their panic and restore the children to their proper place in the royal nursery. But something stopped her from acting on that reasonable impulse. Perhaps the complete peace in their sleeping faces. Perhaps some deeper understanding of why they might have sought refuge with someone who posed no threat and offered no agenda beyond simple safety. Both children had been through trauma that few adults could have survived intact. Their mother's death during childbirth had left them without the primary bond that should have provided security and comfort during their most vulnerable years. Their father, despite obvious love and devotion, was burdened with responsibilities that limited his availability for the constant reassurance that grieving children required. Royal protocol demanded they be raised with dignity appropriate to their station, surrounded by guards and tutors and advisors who understood their political importance, but might struggle to address their emotional needs with appropriate gentleness. It was care that met all practical requirements while potentially falling short of providing the intuitive nurturing that children needed to feel truly secure. Lune stood watching them sleep, and realized that somehow, through means she couldn't understand, they had found their way to someone whose entire existence had been dedicated to providing exactly the kind of comfort they were seeking. But her recognition of their needs didn't resolve the crisis of their presence in her quarters. Every moment they remained missing was another moment of panic for their father, and another opportunity for enemies to capitalize on royal vulnerability. She needed to alert the proper authorities immediately, regardless of whatever instincts had brought them here. Yet as she moved toward her door to summon help, Princess Leanna stirred in her sleep, making the small distressed sound that Lune recognized as nightmare beginning to intrude on peaceful rest. Without conscious thought, she found herself moving to the bedside and gently smoothing the child's hair, while humming the lullaby she used to comfort all the young ones in her care. The princess settled immediately, her breathing deepening as stress melted away under familiar ministrations that spoke to something beyond mere technique, some quality of care that reassured the primitive parts of a child's mind that safety was genuine and protection was absolute. As Lune continued the gentle comfort that had become second nature through years of caring for others, she realized that whatever had brought the royal pups to her quarters, they had found exactly what they needed. For the first time since their mother's death, they were sleeping without the slight tension that marked even their best nights in the royal nursery, without the subtle alertness that suggested their young minds were always partially prepared for the next loss or abandonment. Here, in the humble quarters of someone who mattered little in pack hierarchy, but much in the quiet business of nurturing others, they had found peace that luxury and protection had been unable to provide. The sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor outside interrupted her contemplation, growing louder and more urgent as what sounded like a large search party approached her section of the stronghold. Voices carried through the stone walls, authoritative commands and terse reports that suggested the search was expanding to areas previously considered irrelevant to royal concerns. Check every room, every storage area, every possible hiding place. Expand search to service quarters and staff accommodations. Leave no possibility unexplored regardless of how unlikely. Lune's heart rate spiked as she realized the search had reached her level of the stronghold, meaning that within minutes, her door would be among those opened by increasingly desperate searchers looking for any trace of the missing children. She looked down at the peacefully sleeping forms in her bed and understood that the next few moments would change everything. For them, for her, and quite possibly for the entire pack structure that had shaped all their lives. Taking a deep breath, Lune moved to her door and opened it before the searchers could reach it, stepping into the corridor to meet the approaching search party, rather than waiting for them to discover the situation on their own terms. "I believe," she said quietly to the group of guards and trackers who stopped in surprise at her unexpected appearance. "You're looking for the royal pups." The lead tracker, a grizzled veteran whose scarred face spoke of decades spent in dangerous service to the crown, stared at her with expression that cycled through confusion, hope, and barely contained desperation. "You've seen them?" he demanded, his voice rough with strain of hours spent searching without success. "You know where they are?" "They're sleeping in my quarters," Lune replied simply, stepping aside to allow the search party access to her room, while mentally preparing for whatever consequences would follow this discovery. The silence that followed her announcement was absolute and brief, followed immediately by explosion of activity as guards rushed past her to confirm what she had told them. She heard sharp intakes of breath, murmured expressions of relief and confusion, and then urgent discussion about how to proceed with removing the children without causing distress or alarm. "Don't wake them yet," came a new voice from behind the search party, deeper, more authoritative, carrying weight that made everyone else defer immediately to its owner. Alpha King Ryden Blackfell entered the corridor with presence that seemed to expand the space around him, while simultaneously making it feel inadequate to contain the power he carried. At 35, he possessed the kind of controlled strength that spoke of absolute confidence in his ability to handle any threat or crisis, though lines of exhaustion and worry around his eyes revealed the strain of the past several hours. Lune automatically stepped back against the wall and lowered her gaze in recognition of royal presence, her heart hammering as she realized she was about to face direct questioning from someone whose displeasure could end her existence without appeal or recourse. "Miss," Raiden said, his voice carefully controlled despite obvious tension. "I need to understand exactly how my children came to be in your quarters." Alpha King Raiden Blackfell had faced countless crises during his decade of rule: territorial disputes that threatened war, political conspiracies that undermined royal authority, natural disasters that tested his kingdom's resilience. But nothing had prepared him for the helpless terror of discovering his children missing from their supposedly secure nursery. The past 4 hours had been the longest of his life, filled with scenarios that grew progressively darker as each search effort yielded no trace of Kieran and Liana. Now, standing in the narrow corridor outside quarters belonging to an Omega whose existence he had barely acknowledged despite years of shared residence in the stronghold, Raiden struggled to process relief that threatened to overwhelm the careful control that had carried him through the crisis. His children were safe. That fundamental fact overshadowed every other consideration, though questions multiplied with each passing moment about how they had come to be sleeping peacefully in the bed of someone who should have had no connection to their lives. "Miss," he said again, when the Omega, Loon, according to the quick briefing from his security detail, remained silent after his initial question. "I need to understand exactly how my children came to be in your quarters." Loon Arlo raised her eyes to meet his gaze briefly, before returning them to an appropriately respectful position, focused on the floor near his feet. Her scent, what little he could detect of it, carried no trace of deception or anxiety beyond what was normal for any pack member facing unexpected royal attention. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "I wish I could provide the explanation you deserve, but I honestly don't know how they arrived here. I fell asleep alone in my bed sometime after midnight, and woke when the emergency bells began tolling to find them sleeping beside me." "You have no memory of them entering your quarters? No recollection of any interaction that might have brought them here?" "None whatsoever, Your Majesty. If they knocked on my door or called out, I didn't hear them. I sleep quite deeply after long days caring for the pack's younger children." Loon's voice remained steady, despite the impossibility of what she was describing. "I can only tell you that when I woke and returned to my room after hearing the alarm bells, they were there, sleeping peacefully." Raiden studied her carefully, using both his political instincts and his supernatural senses to evaluate her credibility. Everything about her demeanor suggested honesty, though the story she was telling defied logical explanation. 4- and 3-year-old children didn't simply appear in locked quarters without some form of assistance or invitation. "And you felt no obligation to immediately alert the search parties when you discovered them." "I was preparing to do exactly that, Your Majesty," Loon replied, "but Princess Liana began showing signs of nightmare distress, and I stopped to provide comfort before summoning help. I didn't want her to wake frightened in an unfamiliar environment." The explanation was reasonable, and spoke to instincts that Raiden recognized as appropriate for someone whose role involved childcare. But something about the situation continued to feel incomplete, as if crucial information was being overlooked by everyone involved. "Show me," he said, gesturing toward her quarters. "I want to see them exactly as you found them." Loon nodded and led him through her doorway into the small room that served as her living space. The accommodations were simple but clean, furnished with basic necessities that reflected her position in the pack hierarchy, while maintaining dignity appropriate for someone who contributed valuable services to stronghold operations. But Raiden's attention immediately focused on the narrow bed, where his children lay in sleep, that seemed impossibly peaceful, given the chaos they had unknowingly created through their disappearance. Prince Kieran remained sprawled on his back with the complete relaxation of secure childhood, while Princess Liana had shifted to curl more tightly against her brother, one small hand maintaining contact even in unconsciousness. What struck Raiden most profoundly was the quality of their rest. Both children had struggled with sleep disturbances since their mother's death, frequently waking with nightmares or anxiety that required intervention from nursery staff. Even their best nights were marked by subtle tension that suggested their young minds remained alert for potential threats or abandonment. Yet here, in the quarters of someone they barely knew, they slept with serenity he hadn't witnessed since their earliest infancy, when maternal presence had provided security that nothing else had been able to replace. "How long have they been sleeping this way?" he asked quietly, reluctant to disturb rest that seemed genuinely restorative. "I believe they were already deeply asleep when I returned to my quarters, Your Majesty. Their breathing patterns suggest they've been resting peacefully for some time." Raiden moved closer to the bed, studying his children's faces for any sign of distress or discomfort that might indicate they had been coerced or manipulated into their current location. Instead, He saw only contentment that spoke of choices made freely according to instincts he didn't fully understand. As he reached out to gently touch Kieran's forehead, checking for fever or other signs of distress, his son stirred slightly and made a small sound of protest at the disturbance. But instead of waking or seeking comfort from his father, Kieran turned toward Loon with automatic expectation that she would provide whatever reassurance he needed. The gesture was unconscious but unmistakable, a clear indication that his children had not simply ended up in this room by accident, but had somehow formed attachment to its occupant that went beyond casual acquaintance. "Miss Arlo," Ryden said carefully, "what is your role in caring for the Pack's children? How much interaction have you had with Kieran and Leanna specifically?" "I'm the primary caretaker for abandoned or orphaned pups, Your Majesty, and I assist with general childcare duties during pack gatherings or when families need additional support." Loon's explanation was factual and modest, offering no suggestion that her position involved particular importance or recognition. "Regarding your children specifically, I've had minimal direct interaction. Occasional supervision during large group activities when all the young ones play together, brief assistance when the royal nursery staff needed extra hands during your travels. But nothing that would explain this level of comfort in your presence? Nothing that I can identify, Your Majesty. Though I should mention that both children seem particularly responsive to childcare techniques I learned from my grandmother, who had unusual success with traumatized or fearful young ones." The admission was delivered hesitantly, as if she was uncertain whether sharing such personal information was appropriate when questioned by royal authority, but something in her tone suggested there might be more to her background than the simple service position she currently occupied. "What kind of techniques?" "Traditional comfort methods that focus on creating sense of complete safety and acceptance, rather than trying to address specific problems or concerns," Loon explained. "My grandmother believed that some children need to feel utterly secure before they can process difficult emotions or experiences." Ryden considered this information while studying his sleeping children, recognizing that their current state suggested exactly the kind of deep security that Loon was describing. Whatever instincts had brought them here, they had found someone whose approaches to childcare addressed needs that conventional royal protocols had been unable to meet. But his analysis was interrupted by movement from the bed as Princess Leanna began to stir from sleep, her small face scrunching with the disorientation that preceded full awakening. Ryden moved instinctively to provide comfort and reassurance, but stopped short when his daughter's eyes opened and immediately sought Loon rather than acknowledging his presence. "Luna," Leanna said sleepily, using a childhood pronunciation that transformed Loon's name into something that sounded like endearment. "Thirsty." The simple request was delivered with complete trust that it would be addressed appropriately, while Leanna showed no surprise at finding herself in unfamiliar surroundings, or any concern about her father's unexpected presence in the room. "Of course, little one," Loon replied softly, moving toward a small basin and pitcher that allowed her to provide fresh water without leaving the room. "Let me get you something to drink." As she helped Leanna sit up and take careful sips from a cup, Ryden observed the easy interaction between them with growing confusion about the apparent familiarity his daughter displayed toward someone who claimed minimal previous contact. "Leanna," he said gently, settling on the edge of the bed where he could speak to his daughter without looming over her. "Can you tell Papa how you came to be sleeping here with Luna?" His daughter looked at him with the serious expression she wore when processing questions that seemed obvious to her but confusing to adults. "Sad dreams," she said simply. "Luna makes sad dreams go away." "But how did you know to come here? How did you find Luna's room?" Leanna's expression shifted to the particular type of confusion children displayed when asked to explain instinctive behaviors that felt natural despite being difficult to articulate. "Smelled safe," she said finally, "like Mama's hugs." The innocent observation hit Ryden like physical blow, revealing that his children had been seeking comfort that reminded them of maternal security they had lost too young to fully understand. They had somehow associated Loon's presence with the kind of unconditional safety their mother had provided, and had followed that association to its source when nightmares made their carefully structured royal existence feel insufficient for their emotional needs. "Did you wake up Kieran to come with you?" "Kieran waked up when I waked up," Leanna explained with 3-year-old logic that suggested shared distress rather than one child disturbing another. "We both had sad dreams." Ryden looked from his daughter to his son, who was beginning to show signs of stirring from sleep, and realized that both children had been struggling with difficulties he hadn't fully recognized. Their nightmares weren't random occurrences, but shared trauma responses that had driven them to seek comfort. Their royal environment hadn't been providing. Prince Kieran's eyes fluttered open as conversations penetrated his sleep, and like his sister, his first instinct was to seek Loon's reassuring presence rather than acknowledge his father's arrival. But when his gaze fell on Ryden, confusion clouded his young features as he processed the unexpected development. "Papa?" Kieran said uncertainly, clearly struggling to understand why his father was present in what he apparently considered safe space that belonged to someone else. "Hello, son," Ryden said gently, reaching out to stroke Kieran's hair, with movements that emphasized comfort rather than authority. "Papa was worried when he couldn't find you and Lyanna this morning. Can you tell me how you came to be sleeping here?" Kieran looked between his father and Loon with expression that suggested internal debate about whether his choices would be understood or criticized. "We weren't supposed to leave," he said finally, "but the dreams were too scary and Luna makes them not scary." "How did you know Luna could help with scary dreams?" "She helped before," Kieran replied with matter-of-fact certainty that contradicted Loon's claims about minimal interaction with royal children. "When we played with the other children and I got scared about the loud noises, Luna made it feel better." Rydan turned to study Loon's face, noting the slight flush that suggested embarrassment at having her previous assistants acknowledged in ways that revealed her claims about limited contact might have been overly modest. "Miss Arlo," he said carefully, "it seems my children remember your assistance more clearly than you initially indicated." "Your Majesty, I may have understated the occasions when I provided general childcare during group activities," Loon admitted reluctantly. "Both children have needed comfort during various pack gatherings when noise or crowds became overwhelming, and I did provide assistance as part of my duties to ensure all young ones felt secure. But nothing that would explain how they found your quarters in the middle of the night without guidance? Nothing that I can identify specifically," she repeated, though her uncertainty suggested she was beginning to question her own recollection of events. "Though I should mention that some children seem to possess unusual ability to locate sources of comfort when distressed, particularly those who have experienced significant loss or trauma. The observation was delivered with professional knowledge that spoke of extensive experience with traumatized young ones, reinforcing Ryden's growing suspicion that Loon's background included training or expertise that hadn't been reflected in her current position within the pack hierarchy. "Your Majesty," came a voice from the doorway. Ryden turned to find Lord Commander Garrett approaching with expression that mixed relief at finding the royal children safe, with obvious concern about the implications of their discovery in such unexpected circumstances. "Lord Commander," Ryden acknowledged, rising from the bedside while ensuring his movement didn't disturb his children's continued interaction with Loon. "Sir, the pack leadership has been notified that the royal heirs have been found safe and unharmed," Garrett reported formally. "However, questions are arising about security protocols and how such a breach could occur without detection. The Council requests immediate briefing on circumstances surrounding their disappearance and recovery." Ryden nodded understanding of political requirements, while recognizing that explanations would be complicated by the lack of clear answers about how his children had ended up in Loon's quarters. The situation raised questions about stronghold security that couldn't be answered satisfactorily without better understanding of the children's motivations and methods. "Prepare briefing materials for Council review, but emphasize that primary concern is ensuring this situation doesn't recur, rather than assigning blame for what appears to be unprecedented circumstances," he instructed. "I want comprehensive review of royal nursery security, but I also want analysis of what needs our current protocols might be failing to address." "Understood, Your Majesty." "Regarding Miss Arlo's involvement appears limited to providing appropriate care when she discovered the children in her quarters," Ryden interrupted firmly. "There's no indication of wrongdoing or security breach on her part, though we'll obviously need to understand how such incidents can be prevented in future." The protective statement surprised him with its intensity, though he recognized it was based on observation of his children's obvious comfort with Loon's care, and his growing certainty that she had played no role in creating the crisis, only in resolving it safely. "Of course, Your Majesty," Garrett replied, though his expression suggested ongoing concern about implications that extended beyond immediate security considerations. "Should the royal children be returned to the nursery immediately?" Ryden looked back at his children, who remained content in Loon's presence despite the chaos their disappearance had created throughout the stronghold. Both seemed more relaxed and secure than he had seen them in months, raising questions about whether immediate return to their previous environment was necessarily the best choice for their well-being. Not immediately, he said, after considering options that balanced security requirements with recognition of his children's emotional needs. I want to understand more about what brought them here before making decisions about how to proceed. Your Majesty, Loon said quietly, if it would be helpful, I could remain with them during their transition back to the royal nursery, providing whatever comfort seems necessary while they readjust to their proper environment. The offer was made diffidently, as if she recognized it might be presumptuous for someone of her status to suggest involvement in royal childcare decisions. But something about her willingness to prioritize the children's emotional needs over her own position impressed Ryden with its sincerity. That's thoughtful of you, he replied, realizing that such arrangement might indeed provide the gradual transition that would serve his children's best interests while addressing security concerns about their unexpected mobility. Papa, Kieran said suddenly, drawing his father's attention back to the bedside. Can Luna come eat breakfast with us? She makes the best honey cakes. The innocent request revealed yet another interaction that contradicted claims about minimal contact, suggesting that his children had developed relationship with Loon that extended beyond occasional supervision during group activities. Miss Arlo, Ryden said with growing suspicion that there were aspects of this situation he hadn't yet fully understood. Perhaps you could join us for breakfast while we discuss arrangements that would serve everyone's best interests. As they prepared to leave her quarters with children who showed obvious reluctance to abandon the safety they had found there, Ryden realized that the morning's crisis had revealed vulnerabilities in his kingdom that went far beyond security protocols. His children needed something that royal privilege hadn't been able to provide, something they had found in the humble quarters of an Omega, whose existence he had barely acknowledged, despite her apparent importance to their emotional well-being. Whatever arrangements emerged from this incident would need to address not just how to prevent future disappearances, but how to ensure that the future rulers of his kingdom received the kind of nurturing care that would help them heal from losses that royal protocols had been inadequate to address. And looking at Loon's gentle handling of children who clearly trusted her completely, Ryden began to suspect that the solution might involve elevating someone whose worth had been hidden by assumptions about status and hierarchy that prevented recognition of true value. The royal dining hall had never hosted a breakfast quite like this one. What should have been a private family meal to discuss the morning's crisis had evolved into something approaching diplomatic summit, as various pack officials found reasons to require urgent consultation with the Alpha King about matters that couldn't possibly wait for more appropriate hours. Ryden suspected the real motivation was curiosity about Loon Arlo's unprecedented inclusion in royal family activities, though protocol prevented anyone from directly questioning his decision to invite an Omega to share breakfast with the crown heirs. Instead, they invented administrative emergencies that allowed them to observe the situation while maintaining professional pretenses about their actual interests. Your Majesty, Lord Treasurer Aldwin said as he approached the royal table with documents that had somehow become urgently necessary for immediate review. The quarterly tax assessments require your signature before provincial administrators can proceed with collections. It was obvious bureaucratic manipulation designed to provide excuse for remaining in the dining hall, though Ryden recognized the political necessity of allowing such observations, rather than creating additional speculation through excessive privacy. Better to let pack leadership witness whatever was developing between his family and Loon, than to fuel rumors through secretive behavior that suggested something inappropriate was occurring. Leave them on the side table, Ryden replied calmly. I'll review the documents after breakfast concludes. Meanwhile, his children showed no awareness of the attention they were attracting through their continued preference for Loon's company over formal dining protocols. Prince Kieran had abandoned his designated seat to position himself beside Loon's chair, while Princess Leanna had somehow maneuvered herself onto Loon's lap despite the presence of her own perfectly adequate seating arrangements. What struck Ryden most profoundly was how naturally Loon managed both children's needs while maintaining appropriate respect for royal protocols and dignity. She cut Kieran's food into manageable portions without being asked, anticipated Leanna's requests for different items before they were voiced, and provided gentle correction for minor behavioral issues without disrupting the meal's overall flow. More importantly, both children were eating with appetite he hadn't seen since their mother's death, displaying enthusiasm for food that had been coaxed and negotiated rather than genuinely desired during most family meals. Whatever comfort Loon provided extended to making even routine activities more appealing and less stressful. Miss Arlo, Ryden said during a break in conversations with various officials who continued finding reasons to linger near the royal table. My children seem remarkably comfortable with your presence. More comfortable than I would have expected, given what you described as minimal previous interaction. Lune's cheeks colored slightly, as she recognized that her earlier claims about limited contact were being diplomatically challenged by evidence that couldn't be disputed. Your Majesty, I may have been overly cautious in characterizing my interactions with Prince Kieran and Princess Lyanna, she admitted carefully. While I haven't had formal responsibilities for their care, there have been more occasions for informal assistance than I initially indicated. What kind of informal assistance? Comfort during thunderstorms when the nursery staff were managing multiple frightened children simultaneously. Help with minor injuries sustained during play activities when immediate medical attention wasn't required, but reassurance was needed. Occasional storytelling during group activities when regular entertainment wasn't sufficient to maintain attention. Each example revealed additional instances where Lune had provided care that went beyond basic supervision, building relationship with his children through accumulated acts of kindness that had created trust he hadn't been aware existed. And these interactions occurred without my knowledge or approval. They occurred as part of general childcare duties during times when your children were participating in group activities with other young pack members, Lune replied diplomatically. I assumed such assistance fell within appropriate boundaries for someone in my position, though I understand if you have concerns about unauthorized interaction with the royal heirs. Her careful phrasing acknowledged potential transgression, while explaining the innocent circumstances that had led to boundary crossings no one had recognized as significant until this morning's crisis revealed their cumulative impact. Papa, Princess Lyanna interrupted with 3-year-old directness that cut through diplomatic complexities. Luna tells the best stories about brave princesses who help scared animals. Can she tell stories at bedtime too? The innocent request created absolute silence throughout the dining hall, as everyone present processed the implications of royal heir, specifically requesting ongoing contact with an Omega whose status made such arrangements highly unusual. That's a possibility we could discuss, Ryden replied carefully, recognizing that his response would be analyzed by every person within hearing for clues about his intentions regarding Lune's future role in royal family activities. I would be honored to provide whatever assistance serves your Majesty's children's best interests, Lune said quietly, her tone suggesting she understood the political complexity of the situation, while remaining focused on practical considerations about childcare rather than social advancement opportunities. Before Ryden could respond to her diplomatic offer, the morning's careful balance was disrupted by arrival of someone whose presence always created tension regardless of circumstances. Lady Victoria Ashworth swept into the dining hall with confidence that came from decades as the pack's most influential female authority figure, her expression carrying disapproval that didn't require verbal articulation to be perfectly clear to everyone present. Your Majesty, she said, with curtsy that demonstrated appropriate respect, while somehow managing to convey criticism through its precise execution. I trust I'm not interrupting important family time, though I understand there are matters requiring urgent discussion about this morning's irregularities. The euphemism transformed the children's midnight adventure into scandal, requiring immediate damage control, while her emphasis on family time made clear her opinion about the appropriateness of including outsiders in royal domestic activities. Lady Ashworth, Ryden acknowledged with courtesy, that contained subtle warning about overreach in areas beyond her authority. What urgent matters required discussion that couldn't wait for more appropriate timing? Matters of protocol and propriety that affect the royal children's well-being and the pack's confidence in their proper upbringing, Lady Victoria replied, with conviction that suggested she considered herself qualified to evaluate royal parenting decisions. Specifically, concerns about influences that might encourage future incidents similar to this morning's concerning disappearance. The veiled attack was expertly delivered, challenging Lune's suitability for royal contact without directly criticizing Alpha King's judgment, while positioning Lady Victoria as defender of traditional values against dangerous innovations in childcare approaches. I'm interested in your assessment of which influences pose risks to my children's well-being, Ryden said calmly, though his tone carried subtle shift toward authority that warned against presumptuous overreach. Influences that encourage disregard for established security protocols, disrespect for proper hierarchies, and dependence on individuals whose backgrounds haven't been thoroughly vetted for positions of trust regarding royal welfare, Lady Victoria replied with confidence that suggested she had prepared extensively for this confrontation. Are you suggesting that Miss Arlo represents some form of security risk to my children? I'm suggesting that unprecedented attachment to someone outside normal royal support structures creates vulnerabilities that enemies might exploit, while undermining the established systems designed to ensure royal children's proper development, according to their station and responsibilities. The political maneuvering was sophisticated and dangerous, framing Loon's relationship with his children as potential threat rather than beneficial connection, while positioning traditional approaches as inherently superior to innovative solutions that addressed actual needs rather than theoretical requirements. But before Ryden could respond to Lady Victoria's challenge, an unexpected voice cut through the tension from an entirely different direction. Lady Ashworth, Prince Kieran said with 4-year-old clarity that silenced adult conversation immediately. Luna isn't scary. She makes scary things go away. The innocent defense was devastating in its simplicity, reducing complex political arguments to fundamental truth about comfort and safety that no amount of sophisticated reasoning could refute. Out of the mouths of babes, Ryden thought, recognizing that his son had articulated the core issue more effectively than any adult analysis could achieve. Of course, little prince, Lady Victoria replied with condescending sweetness that barely masked irritation at having her arguments dismissed by child logic. But there are many things that might seem nice, which aren't necessarily appropriate for... Why? Princess Liana interrupted with 3-year-old persistence that demanded actual explanations, rather than vague pronouncements about appropriateness. Lady Victoria found herself in the impossible position of trying to explain social hierarchies and security protocols to children who measured worth through kindness received rather than status assigned, while being observed by pack leadership, who were rapidly recognizing the weakness of arguments that couldn't withstand basic questions from the people supposedly being protected. Because, dear one, there are proper ways for royal children to receive care, and proper people who are trained to provide such care according to standards that ensure your safety and proper development. But Luna does keep us safe, Kieran insisted with stubborn certainty. Safer than anybody, and she makes us feel better when we're sad about Mama. The last observation hit the dining hall like lightning strike, revealing that his children's attachment to Loon specifically addressed grief counseling that formal royal protocols had apparently failed to provide adequately. They had found someone whose approach to childcare included emotional healing rather than simply behavioral management. Your Majesty, Lady Victoria said desperately, recognizing that her position was deteriorating rapidly under scrutiny from royal heirs whose preferences directly contradicted her arguments. Surely you understand the precedent concerns about elevating individuals beyond their appropriate stations based on temporary emotional attachments that might not represent sound long-term judgment. I understand concerns about precedent, Ryden replied carefully. I also understand that my primary obligation is ensuring my children's well-being, rather than maintaining systems that may not be serving their actual needs. The statement was politically revolutionary, suggesting that royal parenting decisions would be based on practical results rather than traditional expectations, while implicitly criticizing established childcare protocols that had failed to address obvious emotional requirements. Furthermore, he continued, his attention turning to Loon with consideration that made everyone present understand they were witnessing potential policy change in real time. I'm increasingly interested in understanding what qualifications Miss Arlo possesses that have enabled her to provide care my children clearly value highly. Your Majesty, Loon said quietly, my qualifications are primarily experiential rather than formal. My grandmother was what older generations called a heart mender, someone who specialized in helping traumatized children process loss and develop healthy attachment patterns despite difficult early experiences. And you learned these techniques from her? I learned the basic principles, though I've never had opportunity to apply them systematically in formal settings. My position here has involved general childcare rather than specialized trauma counseling. The modest explanation couldn't disguise implications that Loon possessed exactly the type of specialized knowledge that his children required, knowledge that hadn't been recognized or utilized because her social status had prevented anyone from investigating her actual capabilities. Your Majesty, Lady Victoria interjected with increasing desperation, emotional attachment alone cannot justify abandoning established protocols for royal childcare. There are considerations of security, propriety, and long-term political implications that... There are also considerations of whether established protocols are producing desired results, or merely maintaining familiar structures? Ryden interrupted firmly. And based on this morning's evidence, I'm beginning to question whether familiar structures have been adequate for addressing my children's actual needs. The rebuke was clear and public, establishing royal dissatisfaction with traditional approaches while opening space for alternative arrangements that prioritized effectiveness over convention. "Papa," Princess Leanna said suddenly, twisting in Lune's lap to face her father directly, "can Luna live with us all the time? Like Mama used to?" The innocent question detonated silence throughout the dining hall, as everyone present processed implications that went far beyond childcare arrangements into territory that could reshape fundamental assumptions about royal family structure. Ryden looked from his daughter's hopeful expression to Lune's shocked face, to Lady Victoria's horrified reaction, understanding that Leanna's suggestion had voiced possibility that others had been thinking, but hadn't dared articulate. "That's a significant question that would require careful consideration of many factors," he said diplomatically, though something in his tone suggested the idea wasn't being dismissed outright. "But not impossible?" Kieran pressed with 4-year-old determination to extract concrete commitments from adult equivocation. "Not impossible," Ryden admitted, watching Lune's expression cycle through disbelief, hope, and terror at implications she clearly hadn't anticipated, though it would represent changes that would affect many people beyond just our family. As conversations resumed around them with nervous energy that suggested everyone was processing revolutionary possibilities they hadn't prepared for, Ryden found himself studying Lune with new attention to qualities that extended beyond her obvious competence with traumatized children. She possessed grace under pressure that would serve royal protocols well, intelligence that had been overlooked due to assumptions about her status, and genuine care for his children that couldn't be manufactured or performed convincingly over extended periods. More importantly, she had somehow earned trust from heirs who had been unconsciously testing every adult in their lives for reliability and finding most wanting. But elevated status would expose her to scrutiny and criticism that could destroy someone unprepared for political warfare that royal positions inevitably attracted. Protection would be essential, along with training that equipped her to navigate complexities of court life without losing authentic qualities that made her valuable. "Miss Arlo," he said quietly during lull in the various conversations swirling around their table, "if circumstances were to change significantly regarding your role in my children's lives, would such changes represent opportunity or burden from your perspective? Opportunity to serve your Majesty's children's best interests would always be honor, regardless of how circumstances might change," Lune replied carefully, "though I would hope for guidance about how to fulfill any expanded responsibilities appropriately." "And you would accept such expanded responsibilities despite potential complications they might create for your own life and well-being?" Lune looked down at Princess Leanna, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder with contentment that spoke of complete security, then met Ryden's eyes with quiet certainty. "Your Majesty, your children need someone who can help them heal from losses that conventional approaches haven't adequately addressed. If I can provide that help, then potential complications for my own circumstances seem relatively unimportant." The commitment was delivered with conviction that convinced Ryden she understood the magnitude of what was being discussed, while prioritizing his children's welfare over personal considerations that would have dominated most people's decision-making. "In that case," he said, making decision that would reshape multiple lives while trusting instincts that rarely led him astray, "I believe we should discuss arrangements that would formalize your role in ensuring my children receive the specialized care they clearly need and want." As Lady Victoria's expression shifted to horrified understanding of what was being proposed, and as various pack officials began recognizing that they were witnessing elevation of someone whose existence they had previously ignored, Ryden realized that the morning's crisis had become catalyst for changes that would extend far beyond improved security protocols. Sometimes the most important discoveries emerge not from careful planning or formal evaluation, but from following the innocent wisdom of children who recognized safety and love when they found it, regardless of whether such recognition aligned with adult expectations about appropriate sources of comfort. His pups had chosen their own guardian, and their choice was about to transform assumptions about worth and hierarchy that had shaped pack life for generations. Looking at Lune's gentle care for children, who had finally found the healing they needed, Ryden knew with absolute certainty that their choice had been not just wise, but perfect. 2 months later, the royal gardens bloomed with late autumn flowers that seemed to celebrate transformation rather than mourn the passing of summer. their colors rich and deep beneath October sunlight that painted everything golden with promise. Children's laughter echoed among the carefully tended paths where Prince Kieran and Princess Liana played with other young pack members under supervision that had evolved into something approaching paradise. Ryden stood on the terrace overlooking the scene, marveling at changes that had occurred since the morning when his children's disappearance had revealed needs he hadn't recognized and solutions he hadn't imagined possible. Lune, now officially designated as Royal Childhood Counselor, though the children simply called her Luna as they always had, moved among the playing children with grace that commanded respect from parents who had initially questioned her elevation, but now competed to ensure their own offspring received attention from someone whose expertise had produced such remarkable results. The transformation in his children had been profound and undeniable. Nightmares had become rare occurrences rather than nightly struggles. Their appetite for food, play, learning, and social interaction had returned to levels he hadn't seen since their earliest years. Most importantly, they had rediscovered joy that grief had stolen, though they now carried memories of their mother with celebration rather than devastating sadness. "Your Majesty," came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to find Lady Victoria approaching with expression that mixed residual disapproval with grudging acknowledgement of results that couldn't be disputed. "The monthly child welfare reports are ready for your review." "Excellent. I assume they continue to reflect positive developments across all metrics?" "They do," Lady Victoria admitted reluctantly. That is, Royal Counselor Arlo's techniques appear to be producing beneficial outcomes not just for your children, but for several other young pack members who have received her intervention for various trauma-related issues." But the correction of Lune's title was delivered with careful precision that acknowledged changed circumstances while making clear that acceptance remained professional rather than personal. But even Lady Victoria couldn't argue with documented improvements in child welfare statistics that had resulted from recognizing Lune's specialized knowledge, and the integration of her methods into general childcare protocols, proceeding according to schedule, though there remain some concerns about training requirements for staff who lack her intuitive understanding of trauma responses. Lady Victoria's tone suggested ongoing skepticism about whether Lune's approaches could be successfully replicated by others. "Understandable concerns," Ryden agreed diplomatically. "Innovation requires adjustment periods for everyone involved." As they discussed administrative details related to expanding trauma-informed childcare throughout pack territories, movement in the garden caught Ryden's attention. Lune was approaching the terrace with both children, their faces bright with excitement about something that required immediate royal attention. "Papa!" Princess Liana called out as they climbed the stone steps. "Luna taught us how to make flower crowns for the harvest festival. Do you want to see?" "I would be honored to see your flower crowns," Ryden replied solemnly, recognizing the importance of acknowledging artistic achievements regardless of their simplicity. Both children proudly displayed circlets woven from autumn blooms that spoke of careful instruction and patient guidance from someone who understood that creative accomplishment built confidence as effectively as formal education. "They're beautiful," he said honestly. "You've both become quite skilled at flower arrangement. Luna says we can teach the other children tomorrow so everyone can have flower crowns for the festival," Prince Kieran added with enthusiasm that reflected his growing confidence in assuming leadership roles among his peers. "An excellent idea. I'm sure the other families would appreciate such thoughtful preparation for the celebration." As his children returned to their play with obvious contentment, Ryden found himself studying Lune's face with attention that had become habitual over the past months. What had begun as assessment of her childcare capabilities had evolved into appreciation for qualities that extended far beyond professional competence. She possessed intelligence that revealed itself through understanding of complex emotional dynamics rather than academic achievement, wisdom that came from experience with healing rather than theoretical knowledge, and strength that expressed itself through gentleness rather than dominance. More importantly, she had brought peace to his family that wealth and power had been unable to provide. "Your Majesty," Lady Victoria said carefully, "if I may observe, the Royal Counselor's integration into court life has proceeded more smoothly than many of us anticipated. Her conduct has been entirely appropriate despite the unusual circumstances of her elevation." It was as close to apology as Lady Victoria would ever offer, acknowledgement that her initial objections had been based on prejudices rather than accurate assessment of Lune's character or capabilities. Miss Arlo has exceeded every expectation regarding her ability to navigate royal responsibilities while maintaining authentic care for those she serves, Ryden replied formally, though his tone carried warmth that suggested personal appreciation beyond professional evaluation. Indeed, though I wonder if consideration has been given to formalizing her position in ways that would provide additional security and stability for arrangements that have proven so beneficial. The delicate suggestion was delivered with diplomatic care that barely concealed its radical implications. Lady Victoria was essentially recommending that Lune's role be elevated beyond professional appointment to something approaching family status, recognition that would protect her position while acknowledging her importance to royal welfare. Such considerations require careful evaluation of multiple factors, Ryden replied diplomatically, though his attention remained focused on Lune's gentle management of children's activities that had transformed royal gardens into space of joy rather than formal obligation. But his consideration of Lady Victoria's suggestion was interrupted by commotion near the garden entrance, where guards were announcing arrival of official delegation that commanded immediate royal attention. Crown Prince Marcus of neighboring Ironhold territory approached with formal escort that indicated diplomatic business rather than social visit. Behind him came advisors and translators that suggested negotiations of significant complexity and importance. "Your Majesty," Crown Prince Marcus said with precise courtesy as he reached the terrace, "I apologize for arriving without advance notice, but urgent developments in border territories require immediate consultation regarding mutual defense agreements." The political crisis that Marcus described involved territorial disputes that could escalate into warfare if not addressed through coordinated response between allied kingdoms. Maps and intelligence reports painted picture of threats that required sophisticated military planning and diplomatic maneuvering that would consume weeks of intensive attention. But as Ryden prepared to transition from family time to international crisis management, his attention was caught by his children's reaction to the disruption of their peaceful afternoon. Both Kieran and Leanna had moved instinctively closer to Lune when armed strangers appeared in their play space, seeking reassurance from someone whose presence represented safety in circumstances that triggered memories of vulnerability and loss. Their response was automatic and unmistakable. When feeling threatened, they sought protection from the person who had proven most reliable for providing security. Lune responded with equal instinct, positioning herself where she could comfort both children while monitoring approaching delegation for signs of how long the interruption might last and how it might affect royal family routines. The seamless interaction revealed relationship that had evolved far beyond professional childcare into something approaching maternal protection, though neither Lune nor the children seemed conscious of the depth of bond that had developed through months of shared trust and mutual care. "Your children appear remarkably secure despite disruption to their activities," Crown Prince Marcus observed with approval. "Such emotional stability speaks well of their upbringing and preparation for future leadership responsibilities." Their emotional stability reflects excellent care from someone who understands their specific needs and has worked consistently to address them, Ryden replied, his tone carrying pride that extended beyond conventional royal satisfaction with offspring development. As diplomatic discussions began consuming his attention with maps and reports that would require hours of analysis, Ryden caught Lune's eye across the terrace and felt profound gratitude for presence that allowed him to focus on kingdom security while knowing his children remained in hands that would protect their well-being with devotion that surpassed professional obligation. Lady Victoria's suggestion about formalizing Lune's position echoed in his mind with growing conviction that stability she provided deserved recognition that would ensure its permanence regardless of political developments or security crises that might reshape other aspects of royal life. Some discoveries were too valuable to risk losing through failure to acknowledge their importance officially, legally, and permanently. Looking at his children's obvious contentment under Lune's care, Ryden made mental note to schedule private conversation about possibilities that would transform arrangement born from crisis into foundation for future that served everyone's best interests. After all, his pups had chosen their guardian wisely. Perhaps it was time to ensure their choice became official family decision that no external pressure could ever challenge or reverse. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.